Okay, so you've probably heard about this thing called DevOps maybe once or twice on the channel already. Well, today we've got a guest who's going to be talking all about some tales from the real world on DevOps. Listen in to find out more. Hello there, welcome back to another episode of Cloud with Chris. You're with me, Chris Reddington, and here we talk about all things cloud. Now, thank you folks for joining. You may have seen a few posts recently about things like GitHub, Azure DevOps. We've of course had it as a feature on the channel several times already, and we're going to be continuing that theme in this episode as well. So you know the deal. If you like this type of content, please hit like, please hit subscribe, hit that notification bell, no matter what platform you're listening in on, whether it is watching on YouTube, whether it's listening on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify. Show your appreciation, show your love, and we can get some more great guests onto the channel to come and talk as well. And speaking of great guests, yet again, we have another stellar guest for the show here today. You've probably seen him in the community already, a very regular face talking about these types of topics and these types of concepts. So let's waste no time and jump straight over and introduce Thomas Thornton. Hey, Thomas, how are we doing?
Hi, Chris. How's it going?
Yeah, good, thank you. Good. It's, September time now, I guess. We're all getting into the swing of summer being gone, but it's doing okay. How about you?
Yeah, no, not so bad. It's raining here, so
I guess that's
yeah,
normal
not so bad.
for our parts of the world, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. We get sun every so often, so it was good. It was actually quite warm this summer, so yeah,
Good.
as you said, into September, and yeah, so all good fun.
Excellent. So I guess then first place to start is some introductions. I suspect a lot of folks will know you from your community work already, but just in case, who are you?
Yeah, cool. I'm Thomas Thornton. So most people know me from possibly my blog, or I'm quite active on LinkedIn and Twitter as well. So my blog, thomasthornton.cloud, I tend to actually blog probably most things, all things Azure DevOps and some GitHub actions and suppose real life scenarios that I've encountered on my day to day. So my day to day job, I'm technical specialist at Kinos, based in Belfast. So yeah, it's a very varied role. Currently leading a team, are within one of our projects, all things Kubernetes and Azure DevOps, primarily focused. So yeah, quite a big environment that spans across, I think, 83 subscriptions and Kubernetes environments. I think is 8 in total,
Oh,
going from sort of development straight to production. So yeah, it's a very, very busy environment.
excellent. And it's awesome that we can ground the discussion in all of these kind of ideas as well. I think sometimes, and I'm sure you'll see this, right, that DevOps can mean many different things to many different
Yeah,
people. But I guess what we're going to be talking about here is some of the real world behind what you've been doing as well, and some of the posts and some of the things that you've seen along the way. So looking forward to this. So I guess
yeah, sounds good.
when we think about DevOps broadly, I guess maybe as a bit of an anchoring point for us, where do you typically start your thoughts off with that?
Yeah, suppose I start my thoughts off just from sort of the beginning, depending if it's a customer engagement or if someone wants to chat DevOps, just seeing where they are,
Mm,
or how they understand DevOps, and sort of giving my take on DevOps. So my take on DevOps is it's more than a buzzword. It's pretty much a culture,
mhm.
depending on the customer or the suppose set of environments, seeing where they are with their DevOps journey, whether that be from a simple CI pipeline to
Mhm.
you are engaging more and more teams, not just development teams, so more stakeholders, say within the company or business. And yeah, so DevOps itself, uh, primarily, I suppose back in the day, it was sort of development focused, and as it is, developers and operations coming together. Nowadays,
Yeah, indeed.
I see more and more stakeholders being introduced in the sort of DevOps culture, and I suppose taking them through a DevOps journey. And I suppose I focus a lot of my blogs on pipelines.
Mhm.
I think that's definitely a good start, a good engagement, building a base pipeline and building from there, introducing sort of checks, CI checks, things like that. build the base, and then more and more stakeholders will come on board, and depending on the customer, their requirements as well, seeing where their DevOps journey can end, or not end, sorry, where it can lead to.
Gotcha. And what I like in what you said in there as well is that obviously it started originally with this dev and ops, hence that term DevOps, right? But there are so many other players and teams now coming into those discussions as well. There are customers I can think of where the architect teams are a direct part of that. There are customers where even the business is part of those discussions as well, which ultimately is what you want to do. You want to break down those silos so you have this cohesive story, everyone's on the same page, and avoiding that randomization and pulling in different directions as much as you can there.
Yeah, very true. And then, as you mentioned, breaking down the silos is, I suppose, coming more and more common. And once they see the breakdown happening and seeing sort of the benefits of what you're trying to introduce, it's very, very beneficial, and not only for the product, but for the whole, I suppose, culture as well.
Yeah, I got that. Awesome. So then, I guess let's put almost the planning piece to one side for a moment, because I guess you mentioned a lot of the content you write and put together is on the pipeline side as well.
Yeah.
From a pipelines perspective, and whether that's GitHub Actions, Azure DevOps pipelines, Jenkins builds and jobs, or GitLab, or whatever people are using, the anchoring point I always see with this CI/CD workflow is really start to think about version control, and that's one of the things, at least in my opinion, you really need to get right before you can even start talking about CI or CD. What do you think?
Yeah, very true. Understanding version control, the sort of Git 101, the sort of branch you're going to work off, and then moving into your sort of branching strategy. I suppose trunk-based development is quite common. Yeah, so understanding, as you mentioned, the sort of Git flow and the branching. So if you're working off the main branch and how that's going to develop or deploy your code bases or deploy your environments, say, from sandbox to pre-production and production. And then that can vary between customer to customer. Some customers may want to develop branch where everything goes into develop first before the flow moves into the main branch for production.
Yeah, indeed. And are there any common gotchas or things that you've seen across your time of various projects or things you've been working on, for example, pitfalls maybe?
Yeah, I think sometimes it can be overthought and and overcomplicated potentially sometimes. So yeah, I would start with the basics. So as I mentioned, I'm a huge fan of sort of trunk-based and working off possibly just one branch. If it's viable. Huge fan of that, and I suppose fast sort of PRs, continuous development as well. Yeah, and then sometimes there could be maybe too many environments that I'm potentially working on. Sometimes branch per environment. Sometimes that sounds good, but yeah, it's a lot of sort of maintenance, and then your code drift and everything gets out of sync, and sometimes it's a lot of effort to keep on top of. So
that can almost be a bit of an anti-pattern, can't it, where you start almost having a branch per an environment. Branch per environment. And then, as you say, you have to then merge changes from your feature branch into all of these different branches to try and test the fix and do what you need to do. And at that point, you get into this strange world where you want to have almost this release train of going from QA or dev, QA, test, prod, whatever your train is. Can you guarantee that change is in all of those different environments? Can you guarantee that the things that you've tested in one of the earlier environments are still consistent in that next environment? And I think that's where typically that breaks down a bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, and then I also think sort of onboarding as well. New team members or new teams into the project and so on. Having a very sort of defined strategy is very beneficial for that as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a great point with that, actually, with new people joining, is not that you don't necessarily trust them, but you want to empower them to be successful. You don't want to set them up for failure, right? And something you touched upon very subtly there, but let's pull out a bit more as well. You mentioned pull requests.
Yep.
Huge part of that CI/CD process, and this, I guess, newer term. I say newer, it's been around for a while, but it's getting resurgence, I think, is this idea of shifting left.
Yep.
Bringing those checks and balances as early as you can into that cycle, as much as you can. And I think pull requests, branch policies have a big part of that.
Yeah, very true. So yeah, I really think your CI checks should definitely start from the pull request. So you can see straight away simple checks, even linting, for example. Depending on the size of code base, you definitely want to have your code well linted to some sort of format. Yeah, so things like that, and then potential CI checks if it's. I suppose I blog quite a lot in Terraform. So if it's a simple Terraform plan, you want to or initialize, you want to confirm that the Terraform is valid, and then moving into a plan, so you can see straight away. And then if you're running something like a checkoff check or some sort of check as well, I would have all that sitting within a pull request. Or sorry, just whenever you pull request, running them sort of policies, and then also as well, you touched on branch protection. Yeah, for sure. So huge fan of that as well.
And for anyone that doesn't know about branch protection, just a quick plug, because obviously we've got to have plugs in these episodes. I wrote a post earlier this week, the week that we're filming, but video will go out a bit later, on GitHub branch protection rules, and then did one on Azure DevOps branch policies as well. And I know there's tons of stuff on your site as well around the pipeline side, and these two concepts can absolutely come together, as you just mentioned. These branch policies and running these pipelines inside, or automated or triggered upon one of these pull requests running. So really great way to be productive and have those automated checks run for you.
Yep, very true. And then I suppose if you're new to this sort of area as well, or the company's new, probably don't try everything at once. Think of a simple strategy.
Yes.
Branch policy. Don't commit, say, for example, directly to main branch. Have a branch policy where a pull request and things need to be checked first, and then build out from there.
Yeah. And the tip I always give to folks, I'm not sure if this kind of resonates with you at all, Thomas, but I often see people trying to run the technology and look at like Azure DevOps or GitHub or whatever tool they're using, and go, right, I need to use GitHub Actions, I need to use Azure Pipelines, I need a pipeline for this thing and this thing and this thing. And I try and pull them back a bit and go, right, hold on, slow down a sec. Think, remove that orchestrator or that piece away for a moment. What are the checks and balances that you're trying to put in place at each of these different steps throughout your development workflow? So I commit code to my own branch. What needs to happen at that point?
Very true.
Yeah, I mean, I want to merge my code with someone else, whether that's dev or main or whatever it is. What should happen then, and how does that train to production happen? How do you kind of see those thoughts?
Yeah, it is very true. Sometimes, sometimes people may want this, and this, but it's not actually what they actually need or they should go for. There's so many blogs out there, so many features. If it's Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions, or as you mentioned, Jenkins and so on, there's so many features. You could spend weeks, months, years implementing everything for no real benefit. So yeah, I think it's sitting down and understanding, I suppose, from the sort of ground, the foundation that you want, and where you see, say, the project in 6 months' time, and what could be beneficial, I suppose, from day one to day, say, 300, that sort of journey. And then, as I mentioned near the start, sort of build sort of small, constant sort of continuous pull requests, small changes, and yeah, I usually find that works very, very well.
Yeah, 100%. And as you rightly say, you don't have to implement all of those checks and balances at once. You can gradually put them in over time. And the reason that I go down that path of you want to think about what steps you want to do in the different stages is think about the pull request kind of example. Folks don't want to run their entire integration suite at that point, which takes 5 or 10 hours, for example, and then they've blocked their developers, right? It's about thinking what's appropriate then at those different stages as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think for a pull request, any fast and efficient is usually better than, as you mentioned, sort of integration testing or something like that. She said it takes hours. That team could be blocked for 5 or 6 hours in any one day. So they'll end up pull requesting larger amounts of code, and that's probably not what you want as well from a pull request perspective, or even from an application perspective.
Yeah.
Someone reviewing that, or depending on their sort of checks or integration checks, it'll probably take more time to write some things. So yeah, as I mentioned several times, small and continuous.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's where you can be clever about using unit tests and things like static code analysis, linting, like you mentioned earlier. You mentioned Chekhov, of course, because of the infrastructure as code work that you've been doing. All great tools that you can go ahead and integrate. I should probably not use the word integrate, but there we go. That you can bring in to your pull request and use.
Yeah, and then I suppose building from that journey, you can do so many cool things with. I suppose I focus a lot on Azure DevOps and relatively new in recent times GitHub Actions. You could do so many cool things. So it really depends, I suppose, from the customer perspective and from the team's perspective, which you find will be the most beneficial.
Gotcha. So then let's focus then, because I guess we focused on the code side and the pull request side of things. Let's move on to the thing we've been hinting, I suppose, a lot about pipelines, GitHub Actions, etc. I guess one of the elephants in the room is the when you look at something like Azure DevOps, the journey it's been on from the classic pipelines to now using code pipelines, for example, YAML. Same with GitHub Actions, using YAML pipelines. There's this, in my opinion, awesome approach of being able to write your pipelines as code.
It's awesome.
Yeah. How are you finding that? Because I know you've written quite a few blog posts on those topics as well.
Yeah, to be honest, totally awesome. I think the move to sort of pipelines is cool. Again, moving back to source control again, going back to source control, everything's source control. So your pipeline change is going to follow the same sort of process as your application change or your infrastructure change. So you're building again from the ground up your source control on everything, which I find very beneficial. And pipelines is cool. Yeah, I've wrote so many, I suppose, pipelines, changes, additions, writing pipelines from the ground up. And yeah, I suppose I follow, keeping your pipelines dry and not to plug my plug too much. I have a post on that and sort of keeping your pipelines dry and having set principles that you would follow in a sort of code implementation also within your pipelines. And yeah, it's pretty much, you have the code sitting there. So from one project to the other, you can nearly lift and shift a lot of the pipelines you would write to sort of have or be generic and play around with the likes of variables, parameters. So things like that is very, very awesome.
For sure. And for anyone who doesn't know, dry, don't repeat yourself. This idea now that your pipelines are code, just like you can follow those same practices in software design, where you can modularize your code and you can reuse it and bring it back into multiple sections of your pipelines. You can do the same with these pipelines as well. It's all code. You just call another template and bring that code in, which is absolutely awesome.
Yeah, it's very, very cool. And then you touched on templates there. Templating, I'm a huge fan of. And as you said, for example, if it's a Azure CLI script or a Terraform script or even any sort of testing, you can just reference the template. So very, very cool.
Yeah, exactly. Don't have to have your Terraform plan, Terraform apply, run a Chekhov thing, do this many different times. Just put the template once, have a parameter, and that's your workflow for deploying infrastructure as code. Done.
Yeah, it is awesome. Totally awesome.
Awesome. So I guess that's maybe a little hint that's probably one of your top tips. What would you say maybe some of your other favorite blog posts that you've written, or some of those things that maybe you find people didn't know that they could do, perhaps?
Yeah, I think templates isn't probably pushed as much as potentially it should be. Templating, that depends as well on sort of the person's experience or the team's experience and where they are with pipelines and writing templates. And I suppose seeing the benefit of templates in a few weeks, you could use that template, as I mentioned, in say multiple projects or multiple deployments. It's just lift and shift. And yeah, going back to sort of parameter or using parameters and I suppose as well, sort of finding or not finding, replacing within your templates, you can have conditions. Conditions are awesome. On any template I write, usually has some conditions or a lot of conditions, depending on the set of parameters or the sort of workflow I want to go on. And then that brings us back again to sort of your branching strategy. If it's not, say, main branch, don't run these set of templates or this set of code. If it's just a pull request, do this. Or if it's a pull request, do this. If it's merged into main, don't do that, and so on. So you can really play about with pipelines, and conditions are awesome as well.
Nice. It helps bring that consistency then, doesn't it? I think that's the key thing, is consistency across these pipelines.
Yeah, very, very true. And then there's so many different, suppose you can write pipelines and introduce other pipelines once that's finished and so on as well. So it really depends on this, I suppose, the strategy that you're looking for and looking to achieve as well within your sort of pipelines and running them from there.
Gotcha. And I guess then if we think about pipelines, I guess the context that we started the discussion with was infrastructure as code, talking a bit about Kubernetes as well. But what about outside of those typical use cases? Maybe things like data, for example. Have you seen much in that space, for example?
In terms of a pipeline?
Yeah.
Yeah, you could sometimes schedule pipelines for something like for example, Azure file copy or SCP or anything between, say, virtual machines sometimes as well. I suppose within Azure, there's other ways to do that, Azure automation and things. Yeah, thinking off the top of my head, I think the likes of sort of a file copy, something like that, or if you copy in between different folders or something, sort of maintenance tasks as well, you can have certainly within pipelines. And then I suppose the likes of Azure DevOps pipelines is not just for Microsoft Azure, AWS and other cloud providers as well. I've saw examples of teams running Azure DevOps and their projects sitting in AWS and so on. So yeah, it's very cloud agnostic and suppose provider agnostic as well. So yeah, very, very cool.
Gotcha. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? That's how I try to describe Azure pipelines to people, is rather than having me, the human, sat at my keyboard writing the commands into the command prompt, why not just have some orchestrator that triggers based upon certain events that goes ahead and runs and then goes and executes these things instead? Less mistakes, or fewer mistakes, I should say, and
very, very
predictability.
true. Yeah, and then suppose pipelines as well. I see some people, I think, of their blogs is ingested into pipelines too.
Yeah, so I guess you just mentioned about some people ingesting blogs and things in their pipelines as well. If I switch us over slightly to GitHub and GitHub Actions, something that I've been doing a bit of work in my spare time, one of my pet projects, Card with Chris, of course, we're recording for this right now. I put blog posts and content, etc. out there. And one of the things that I wanted to do was make it easy for me to go and cross-post to sites like Dev2, to Medium, to others. Because I'm notoriously bad at cross-posting, publishing my content, doing all that type of stuff. I don't know how you keep up with it, but I'm notoriously bad at that stuff. But something that I did with GitHub Actions was made my own GitHub action, actually, to cross-post my content when it's committed to the repo, go ahead and publish it to those services. So I am a big GitHub Actions fan. So I guess
very cool.
I guess where I'm going with this segue is, how are you finding the experience with GitHub Actions, having come from the Azure pipeline space?
I suppose GitHub Actions, using it quite often now as well. I suppose once I've worked on Azure DevOps pipelines, so it's very, very similar and quite familiar with the sort of setup, just sort of syntax changes and things like that. But yeah, I suppose what you have in pipelines, you could pretty much do in GitHub Actions as well. And yeah, we run a lot of CI checks within GitHub Actions, rather than transversing to DevOps pipelines and then so on. So we just have it all under sort of one roof and sits within the GitHub repository. For example, recently, one of our Flux setups, we have various Flux checks, and validations within that. That's all run from GitHub Actions. And then once a user pull requests, there's various amount of checks run within that.
Nice. Yeah, with you. And I think the thing that I really like about GitHub Actions in particular is kind of that point that I made about the cross-posting action that I made. That's just something I made. And yes, you could make tasks in Azure DevOps, you publish them to the marketplace, they're then available for folks. But the model, the way it works in GitHub Actions is super, super clever. Like any GitHub repository could, in theory, become a GitHub action. It could be a GitHub action that anyone could use. So you could absolutely go and use my Hugo cross-poster if you wanted. The challenge, though, like anything in the DevOps world, is that's a dependency you're taking in. You need to trust and understand what is going on in that, right? It's something you're running in your pipeline. But I think there's so much potential with GitHub Actions because of that, because it's built around the open source community. It's built for the open source community. And the fact that anyone can now go make their own actions to increase the capability of GitHub Actions is just awesome.
Yeah, very true. And then also, I suppose, not the learning of how to deploy a pipeline, but it is pretty much all straight out of the box. If you go into the folder, and it'll nearly pick up a workflow for you, and straight away you're running a GitHub action, and very, very quick and efficient. I'm definitely a huge fan of GitHub Actions as well. And I suppose in the coming months, we'll see more and more utilization of GitHub Actions as well. So you'll see some more and more blog posts in that area as well.
Excellent. Look forward to it. So folks, you have to check those out now. Definitely bookmark thomasthornton.cloud and go and check those out. Excellent. Awesome. So then I guess we touched on dependencies a little bit there as well. Dependencies is an interesting one because it can go in so many directions, right? I'm trying to think of where we scope this discussion to go. But if we think of, we've been talking about Azure DevOps and GitHub a bit here as well. You've got things like Azure Artifacts, things like GitHub packages. I guess people will be used to things like NuGet and all of these other package managers. But any tips for folks managing those types of things? Is that something you're seeing come up a lot in the day-to-day that you're doing? Any challenges around that?
Yeah, I suppose on the package manager side of things, my current project, not so much. I suppose we have Jenkins as well in the deployment, so a lot of that's flowing through Jenkins. Previous times, I think it's just the understanding, and as you mentioned, sort of dependency management, what is needed, what comes first, and how that flow works. If it's going to zip or not zip or archive, or the sort of flow within that. And then I suppose the tasks are, a lot of them are sort of out of the box. If it's a NuGet package, things like that, a lot of it's out of the box, and you just need to sort of parameterize your values. So it's quite straightforward. It's just to understand, I suppose, from the user's perspective or the team's perspective, how they're going to implement that into their current pipeline or into their sort of stage, which stage is going to be ingested at.
Yeah, gotcha. And I think again, it's thinking a bit about that branching strategy as well. I think that plays a bit into the whole package management side of things.
Yeah, very, very true.
Because what you don't want is almost this spaghetti code base where you're depending on different things inside of the code base. You want to be able to, modularize those things and again rely on a framework instead of having this big monolithic code base that you have to try and untangle, right?
Yeah, monolithic probably majority of time. I definitely wouldn't recommend. And as you say, it's untangling that. It's fine if you've wrote it at the time, but 6 months later you're going to troubleshoot or dependency management or whatever on top of that. Yeah, it can be a very much a spaghetti junction and spending a lot of time trying to delve into that. And then going back to what you mentioned, the sort of branching strategy. If you've multi sort of branches in different environments per branch and things, it could be an interesting few days trying to sort of dependency management and things on that.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Monolithic, I probably wouldn't recommend have a sort of new project or new area. I would keep it very simple. I just used to modularize. The more you modularize, most of the time, for the better.
Gotcha. Excellent. And then I guess if we think about the basis of this episode here, tales from the
Yep.
real world and talking about some of those real world pieces, are there, either some awesome shining examples that you can think of great practices you've seen in some of the projects you've worked along, which are worth calling out? So there's some almost horror stories, and again, not obviously naming any scenarios or projects or anything, but just things that you can think of that really stand out of your time working in the space.
Yeah, I think, well, I suppose some examples. Suppose if we go back to pipelines and infrastructure as code, I think the use of repetition is very, very common. If it's a stage, just copy in a stage or a task, where I suppose depending on the experience, you can move that to a template, or if it's Terraform, copy and pasting sort of resources where you could spend time running a module, and say 6 months down the line, it'll be far more beneficial than copying the same resource, changing some values and so on. Yeah, I would say that, I suppose, quite often. Modularization, I definitely recommend that if it's Terraform or pipelines, as I've mentioned previously. Yeah, and suppose examples vary, and I've worked in a lot of, I suppose, awesome projects, a lot of cool things. I've wrote a lot of sort of cool pipelines and a lot of multi-stage pipelines. Some of the pipelines currently says maybe 20 stages long, and they work continuously, and I suppose dependencies on top of that, all that cool things. And recent times as well, sort of, as I mentioned, Kubernetes, a GitOps culture. GitOps is, I find it truly awesome, but that's a topic for another time. So yeah, I've spent a lot of time in the past few months on all things GitOps and introducing, adding to our sort of GitOps workflow. Absolutely awesome. Really, really, really cool. So yeah, that as well. And I suppose it's all falling down to sort of your repository and the setup of that.
Yeah, and your point about GitOps is a discussion for another time is absolutely true, because I think from my perspective, what I see is GitOps almost requires another level of maturity above, because it is so dependent upon that branching strategy. So pull requests, all these things are so much more important. For anyone that doesn't know, and I'm probably not doing it justice in this very brief summary, but think about GitOps as more of a pull-based approach. So you have an agent running on your Kubernetes cluster is the common example, and it's watching that Git repository, and as soon as there's a change, it goes and applies the changes which are in that repository. So it's always in that consistent state. But obviously the challenge is, as soon as something goes into that repository on that certain branch, the change is made, right? The benefit is also the drawback, and it's
very true.
Having that mature approach to that.
Yeah, again, it's pretty much a bolt-on top of what you're working on at the moment. So having a branching strategy and having that running and understanding that flow, and then bolting on the likes of GitOps on top of that, very, very beneficial. And as you mentioned, can have a drawback as well if the branching strategy isn't there and something goes into the wrong environment at the wrong time. Yeah, something like that. But yeah, GitOps is very, very cool.
Especially if you're using that model, because pull-based is really scalable, right? In the sense you've got many different agents across different clusters, maybe deployed across retail stores, bank environments, cruise ships, whatever scenario you want to apply, you could kind of apply the different instances and the different deployments. It scales really well from a deployment perspective. But
yeah, it definitely does. And then suppose from my perspective, I think we have 120 plus applications all follow the GitOps workflow, and as I mentioned, 8 environments. So yeah, very, very busy repository, but works very, very well once you have the strategy nailed down.
Exactly. I think that's the point, is it? Once that strategy is nailed down, right? Otherwise, could be a challenging one there. Yeah.
Yeah, very, very true. And again, as I mentioned, and also suppose we've both mentioned, no need to grab it all at once. Understanding a simple workflow and building on top of that it'll be far, far more beneficial in say 6 months' time. Absolutely. And following that journey, small bolt-ons per time, and you'll be very successful and efficient product or set of pipelines to work with.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. So I guess then we've been talking for about 30 minutes or so now here, Thomas. So I guess thinking of starting to wrap us up. So in terms of closing thoughts, in terms of the things that stick out to you across your entire time sharing your blog posts and the projects you've been working on, what would be your tips for folks who are either brand new to the space, maybe been doing a bit and dabbling and wanting to go to the next step, or those who consider themselves the hardcore pros, they're already DevOpsing every day, they want to take it to the next level? How would you give advice to any of those different camps?
Yeah, I suppose if someone's starting out in their journey, just think simple. Grab a few blog posts or a few sort of tutorials to understand the pipeline and what it can do, or a simple set is deploying a simple Terraform resource or something similar to that. And then moving up into that, the likes of those who have used Azure DevOps or from a DevOps background and really do it day in, day out, seeing where the benefits are, understanding your workflow and potentially what you want to achieve, and then understanding this, and this could do that. But is that what we want? Is it a simple additional CI check rather than, say, building a whole house when all you need is a few bricks to make your pipeline more efficient? And understanding your sort of workflow and flow at the moment and where you want to end up. I think it's understanding sometimes the journey where they want to potentially not end up, but say in 6 months' time, we would like this, rather than trying to bolt it all on at once. A lot of the time, that will take probably more time than having, again, going back to sort of small changes and constant small changes. Usually builds a far better product. But yeah, there's so much out there. If it's Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions and so on, there's so many repositories, blog sites, articles. It's very, very cool, and the community is very, very sort of beneficial, I find, to that as well. So if anyone's any queries and so on, just give me a shout and we can set up a Teams call and chat and go from there.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, Thomas, it's been great to talk through your insights. It's been great to hear a bit about your background and some of the things you've been working on. And again, for folks who are listening in or watching, thomasthornton.cloud, go ahead, bookmark, and definitely check out some of his blog posts to go and learn more. But Thomas, thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Cheers.
So there we go, folks. We have been talking all about DevOps and some of those tales from the real world, some of those things that have worked along the way, thinking of that journey from version control, how important it is, then going along, using your pull requests, having your checks and balances, making the right choices in those different stages, understanding what is it that you want to check at each different stage, taking that step back from the technology and realizing you don't need to do it all at once. Gradual changes, incremental changes, and build that pipeline and that workflow up over time. And eventually you can put your pipelines, your actions, your jobs, whatever it is, whatever platform you're using, put those together to go ahead and keep improving the work that you're doing there. So there we go, folks. Hope you've enjoyed this one. As always, please hit like, please hit subscribe, hit that notification bell on the channel. Of course, cloudwithchris.com. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. And no least, of course, please go ahead, check out Thomas's website as well, thomasthornton.cloud. Go and check him out on Twitter. His details are on the Cloud with Chris site as well. We're on the screen earlier. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. And until the next one, folks, thank you for watching and bye for now.